you believe that a Japanese sword can cut through an iron helmet? In movies, anime, and video games, this kind of scene may not seem unusual. But in real life, many people would probably assume that if a Japanese sword were used to strike an iron helmet, the blade would either break or the edge would chip. However, the story I am about to introduce is not fiction. It is a legendary event that actually took place in the history of Japanese swordsmanship. And at the center of this story was Sensei Terutaka Kawabata, the founding soke of Ryushin Shouchi Ryu, the school in which I trained. Today I would like to talk about Kabutowari, the art of cutting through a helmet. This technique has become a legend in the world of Japanese martial arts and Japanese swords. The story dates back to 1886, during the Meiji era. After the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Japan underwent rapid modernization. The samurai class gradually disappeared, and with the enforcement of the Sword Abolition Edict, the Japanese sword began to lose its role as a practical weapon. Kenjutsu too entered a period of decline. At that time, the idea that Kenjutsu was already an outdated art began to spread among the people. It was precisely during this era that a special demonstration was held. Its purpose was to prove the value of Kenjutsu, as well as the excellence of the Japanese sword. November 10, 1886. The Fushimi no Miya residence. In the presence of Emperor Meiji himself, one of the most famous helmet-cutting demonstrations in Japanese swordsmanship history took place. This event would later become known as the Tenran Kabutowari. The demonstration included categories for swords, spears, and bows. In the sword category, the participants included Sakakibara Kenkichi of the Jikishin Kage Ryu, Henmi, Sosuke of the Tatsumi Ryu, and Ueda Umanosuke of the Kyoshin Meiichi Ryu. They were among the greatest masters of Kenjutsu of their time. The first to step forward was Ueda Umanosuke. However, his attempt was unsuccessful. His katana bounced off the helmet and failed to cut into it. Next came Henmi Sosuke. He too only managed to leave a mark on the helmet, but did not succeed in cutting through it. And finally, Sakakibara Kenkichi, the great swordsman of the Jikishin Kage Ryu, stepped forward. He chose a Japanese sword known as dotanuki. Then, with all his strength, he struck down at the helmet. The result was a success. A deep cut measuring approximately 10.6 centimeters was left on the helmet. The people who witnessed it were astonished. Then, 100 years later, in 1987, Japan's TBS television planned a special documentary program to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Tenran Kabutowari. Its purpose was not simply to recreate a historical scene. It was to verify, in the modern era, the records from 100 years earlier. To accomplish this challenge, two essential elements were needed. First, a person capable of forging the finest Japanese sword. Second, a swordsman capable of truly bringing out the sword's full potential. The first person selected was Yoshindo Yoshihara sensei, one of the greatest swordsmiths of his generation. Yoshindo Yoshihara sensei was born into the renowned Yoshihara family of swordsmiths. He began learning sword making from a young age, studying under his grandfather, the first-generation kunie, from the age of 12. In 1965, he became a swordsmith, officially licensed by Japan's Agency for Cultural Affairs. In the modern world of Japanese sword making, Yoshindo Yoshihara sensei is regarded as one of its most representative masters. However, this challenge was not simply about forging a beautiful sword. He had to create a sword that would not break, even when striking a steel helmet. And that sword also had to transmit the force of the strike fully into the target. Through repeated folding, forging, hammering, refinement, and adjustment, Yoshindo Yoshihara sensei created a special Japanese sword for this very challenge. And the person chosen to wield that sword was none other than Sensei Terutaka Kawabata, the founding soke of Ryushin Shouchi Ryu. Kawabata sensei trained for many years in Tenshinsho Jigen Ryu and served as a shihondai of that tradition. Later, in 2006, he founded Ryushin Jigen Ryu, which would later become Ryushin Shouchi Ryu. He was one of the most important figures in the Japanese swordsmanship world of his generation. He also received the Budo Korosho, or Martial Arts Meritorious Award, which is regarded as one of the highest honors in the martial arts world. In addition, for his contributions to society in various fields, Kawabata sensei was awarded both the Medal with Blue Ribbon and the Medal with Yellow Ribbon by the Japanese government. According to accounts passed down among those connected to the school, TBS television repeatedly asked Kawabata sensei to participate in the program. At first, Kawabata sensei declined several times. However, the production team continued to request his cooperation. and eventually Kawabata-sensei agreed to appear. Kabutowari is not a technique that can be accomplished by brute force alone. It requires correct posture, angle, and trajectory, so that the force can be transmitted into the target without being wasted. It also requires the instantaneous concentration of the entire body's power into the sword. No matter how excellent the sword may be, the attempt will fail if the technique is insufficient. Conversely, even with superb technique, success is impossible if the sword itself cannot withstand the impact. Finally, the historic moment arrived. Sensei Terutaka Kawabata stood before the steel helmet. In his hands was the Japanese sword forged by Sensei Yoshindo Yoshihara. Amid the palpable tension, the sword came down. In that instant, the clear sound of steel rang through the air, and on the surface of the helmet, a deep and distinct cut was left behind. The recorded length of the cut was approximately 12 centimeters. This result surpassed the approximately 10.6 centimeter record left by Sakakibara Kenkichi 100 years earlier. The legend had come back to life in the modern era. This success was not merely an individual achievement. It was made possible by the perfect combination of the Japanese sword, forged by Yoshindo Yoshihara sensei, and the Koryu kenjutsu inherited and embodied by Sensei Terutaka Kawabata. A Japanese sword strong enough to withstand the impact of striking a steel helmet, and a sword technique capable of drawing out the full potential of that blade. When these two elements came together, the Tenran Kabutowari, which had remained a legend for 100 years, was finally verified once again in the modern era. What astonished me most when I watched this historical footage was that Kawabata-sensei accomplished the challenge with a single downward strike. And despite the immense force of the blow, the helmet, which was not fixed in place, did not fly away. It remained firmly where it was. This made me realize that true swordsmanship is not simply about power. It is a skill formed through posture, trajectory, breathing, body movement, and mental concentration. Even nearly 40 years later, the principles and spirit behind this technique continue to be passed down today. After watching this footage, I came to understand even more deeply how important each of my daily basic movements truly is. I also came to understand why we constantly strive to concentrate the power of the entire body into the sword. This history lies at one of the roots of the Ryushin Shouchi Ryu style that I practice. Kenjutsu is not simply the art of wielding a sword. It is a culture forged by people, technique, swords, and a spirit that has been passed down over a long period of time. Sensei Terutaka Kawabata brought a legend from 100 years ago back to life. And that spirit continues to live and breathe within the training of Ryushin Shouchi Ryu to this day.